Today we examine the life of a woman who faced many obstacles in her life, disadvantaged in several ways, yet she was a woman of virtue and love who showed kindness and respect to others. But before we get to today's episode, I want to remind you that Time of Grace Ministry has many resources to strengthen your walk with Jesus. Videos, books, Bible studies, devotions, podcasts, and blogs. You can find them all on our website at timeofgrace.org. I also want to thank you for telling your friends and relatives about Time of Grace and for partnering with us so we can point people to what matters most, Jesus. The Bible is incredibly interconnected with threads that run through it from beginning to end. In this podcast, I will uncover these threads, help you dig deeper into God's truth, and inspire you to live your life with greater confidence and joy. Welcome to Bible Threads with me, Dr. Bruce Becker. In our episode for today, we meet a woman named Ruth, whom we learn about in the Old Testament book with the same name. The opening verses of the book of Ruth provide the prologue to her story. In the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land. So a man from Bethlehem in Judah, together with his wife and 2 sons, went to live for a while in the country of Moab. The man's name was Elimelech. His wife's name was Naomi, and the names of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion. They were Ephrathites from Bethlehem, Judah, and they went to Moab and lived there. Now, let's unpack some of the details. The story of Ruth occurred during the period of the Judges, which I have talked about in other podcast episodes. Bible scholars suggest that these events occurred a decade or so on either side of the year 1020 BC. Elimelech, Naomi, and their 2 sons lived in Bethlehem until a famine forced them to move to the country of Moab. Moab was located east of Israel on the eastern shores of the Dead Sea. The Bible tells us that Elimelech and his family were Ephrathites from Bethlehem. Now, the term Ephrathites is an older name for Bethlehem residents, and it identified Bethlehem as the town located in the tribe of Judah. You may recall an Old Testament prophecy in the book of Micah that also referenced the Bethlehem in Judah with the term Ephrathah. The prophecy foretold where the Messiah, the Christ, would be born. It reads, "But you, Bethlehem Ephrathah, though you are small among the clans of Judah, out of you will come one for me, one who will be ruler over Israel, whose origins are from of old, from ancient times." Next we learn what happened to Elimelech, Naomi, and their 2 sons in Moab. Now Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. They married Moabite women, one named Orpah and the other Ruth. After they had lived there about 10 years, both Mahlon and Chilion also died, and Naomi was left without her 2 sons and her husband. What a sad story. Naomi lost her husband. Her 2 sons married Moabite women, but her sons also died after living in Moab for a decade. And although the Bible doesn't mention it, it appears that her 2 sons died without fathering any children. I've heard that some people claim that bad things happen in groups of 3. Well, I'm not really sure about that, but it was certainly true for Naomi. Her husband died, her 2 sons died, and there were no grandsons to carry on the family name. Naomi's family line looked like it was coming to an end. The famine in Israel eventually came to an end, so Naomi decided to return to Bethlehem with her 2 daughters-in-law. But as they started out on the journey, Naomi had a change of heart, or perhaps she realized that her Moabite daughters-in-law would face challenging circumstances living in Israel. Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law, "Go back, each of you, to your mother's home. May the Lord show you kindness as you have shown kindness to your dead husbands and to me. May the Lord grant that each of you find rest in the home of another husband." After a short conversation about their likely future, if they returned to Israel with Naomi, Orpah returned to Moab. But Ruth insisted on returning to Bethlehem with Naomi. "Look," said Naomi, "your sister-in-law is going back to her people and her gods. Go back with her." But Ruth replied, "Don't urge me to leave you or to turn back from you. Where you go, I will go, and where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if even death separates you and me." When Naomi realized that Ruth was determined to go with her, she stopped urging her. Perhaps this is a good place to talk about ancient Middle Eastern culture in regards to men and women. There were 4 cultural challenges that made it difficult for Ruth to live in Israel. First, she didn't have a husband. In that culture, the status of a woman was primarily based on her relationship with her male relatives. Ruth, as a Moabite, didn't have any male relatives in Israel. Any relatives she had were back in Moab. And the prospect of finding a new husband in Israel, after having been married with no children, were odds stacked against her. Ruth was certainly among the least of these. Second, Ruth was the equivalent of an undocumented alien. On top of it, she was from a country that was, at times, the sworn enemy of the nation of Israel. For example, during the period of the Judges, King Eglon of Moab subjugated the nation of Israel for 18 years. The judge that the Lord God sent to rescue Israel was Ehud, a southpaw, a left-handed rescuer. Now, if you want to learn more about Ehud and Eglon, check out my podcast series, True Crimes Bible Edition. There is an episode entitled Ehud. Anyway, for Ruth to show up in Bethlehem with Naomi would have raised suspicion. It would have been obvious that she wasn't from around there. The third cultural challenge was that Ruth was a religious outsider. Even though she had confessed her faith in Naomi's God, the people of Bethlehem wouldn't have known that. Every Israelite man and woman knew about the religious life of the people of Moab. They worshipped idols, specifically Chemosh, the patron god of the Moabites. What was even worse was that the Moabites also practiced human sacrifice. Do you recall during the days of the prophet Elisha when King Mesha of Moab went into battle against the military alliance of Israel, Judah, and Edom? This is what we learn about the end of that battle. When the king of Moab saw that the battle had gone against him, he took with him 700 swordsmen to break through to the king of Edom, but they failed. Then he took his firstborn son, who was to succeed him as king, and offered him as a sacrifice on the city wall. The fury against Israel was so great, they withdrew and returned to their own land. Imagine that. The king of Moab sacrificed his own son, who was to be the successor to the throne. Ruth's past religious heritage was offensive to the people of Israel as it is to us. The fourth cultural challenge impacted both Ruth and Naomi. Without a male relative, they were returning to Bethlehem in legal limbo. In that culture, Naomi would have had no legal right to the property of her husband because property rights rested with the male head of household. She could sell it, but then where would she live? And Ruth obviously wouldn't have any rights to that property either. Just think of it. When Ruth arrived in Bethlehem, she would have been more than among the least of these. She faced multiple challenges and was disadvantaged in several ways. Wrong marital status, wrong citizenship, wrong religious background, and wrong gender. When Naomi and Ruth returned to Bethlehem, they had each other, but they had no way to support each other with one of the basic necessities of life, namely food. Fortunately, the Lord God had provided a social safety net for his Old Testament people. It was the practice known as gleaning. There are two main references in the Old Testament that describe gleaning, one in the book of Leviticus and the other in the book of Deuteronomy. From Leviticus chapter 19, "When you reap the harvest of your land, do not reap to the very edges of your field, or gather the gleanings of your harvest. Do not go over your vineyard a second time, or pick the grapes that have fallen. Leave them for the poor and the foreigner." Then in Deuteronomy chapter 24, "When you are harvesting in your field and you overlook a sheaf, do not go back to it. Leave it for the foreigner, the fatherless, and the widow, so that the Lord your God may bless you in all the work of your hands. When you beat the olives from your trees, do not go over the branches a second time. Leave what remains for the foreigner, the fatherless, and the widow. When you harvest the grapes in your vineyard, do not go over the vines again. Leave what remains for the foreigner, the fatherless, and the widow." In Israel, in Old Testament times, there were no state or federal government programs that provided food to the poor and needy, nor were there any local food pantries or a hunger task force in Bethlehem. In ancient Israel, everyday people provided food to foreigners, widows, and fatherless children through the practice of gleaning. When Naomi and Ruth arrived back in Bethlehem, it was the beginning of the barley harvest. It was springtime, and the harvest provided an immediate opportunity for gleaning and the gathering of food. In chapter 2, we're told that Ruth went out into the fields, and as it turned out, she was working in a field belonging to Boaz, who was from the clan of Elimelech. The phrase translated as it turned out, is from a Hebrew word meaning by chance. It was a coincidence, obviously, that Ruth gleaned in a field owned by Boaz. Or was it? Do you believe in coincidences? I don't, and let me tell you why. Did you know that there is also a New Testament Greek word that can be translated as coincidence or by chance or it so happened? It occurs just once in the New Testament, and it was a word spoken by Jesus himself in the parable of the Good Samaritan. The parable begins with Jesus telling us about a man who was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho, and along the way he was robbed, assaulted, and left for dead. Jesus then tells us, now by chance a priest was going down that road, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. The English phrase by chance comes from the Greek word synchorion, which is a combination of two Greek words, syn, S-Y-N, and kyrios. Syn means together with, and kyrios means supreme authority or Lord. By the way, are you familiar with the phrase Kyrie eleison? Kyrie is related to kurios. It means Lord, have mercy. So here in a biblical definition of coincidence, it's what occurs by the Lord God's arrangement of circumstances. Now, you and I know that there are no circumstances in this world that the Lord our God can't arrange. Ruth ended up in Boaz's field because the Lord God had arranged it. So what do we know about Boaz besides being from the clan of Elimelech? Well, he was a man of standing, as the Bible tells us. So what does that mean? Well, there are actually 3 Hebrew words translated into English as a man of standing. The first word is the common Hebrew word for man. The second word emphasizes the man's strength or power. And the third word emphasizes the man's property, wealth, and the fact that he was a landowner. Boaz was a man of strength and wealth. And from what happened next, we learn that Boaz was much, much more. He was a kind, caring, and generous man. On the day that Ruth went to glean in Boaz's field, Boaz showed up to check on the harvesters and the harvest. He noticed a young woman gleaning in his field. So Boaz asked the overseer of his harvesters, "Who does that young woman belong to?" The overseer replied, "She is the Moabite who came back from Moab with Naomi." She said, "Please let me glean and gather among the sheaves behind the harvesters." She came into the field and has remained here from morning till now, except for a short rest in the shelter. Boaz demonstrated his kindness and concern in what he then said to Ruth. "My daughter, listen to me. Don't go and glean in another field, and don't go away from here. Stay here with the women who work for me. Watch the field where the men are harvesting and follow along after the women. I have told the men not to lay a hand on you. And whenever you are thirsty, go and get a drink from the water jars the men have filled." Boaz was concerned for Ruth's safety, especially because she was a foreigner. He invited her to glean only in his fields. He told his workers not to lay a hand on her as in a forceful way. Boaz was also concerned for her health and well-being. He encouraged her to drink enough water from the jars that the workers had filled. And when it came to mealtime, Boaz said to her, "Come over here, have some bread, and dip it in the wine vinegar." When she sat down with the harvesters, he offered her some roasted grain. She ate all she wanted and had some left over. As she got up to glean, Boaz gave orders to his men. "Let her gather among the sheaves and don't reprimand her. Even pull out some stalks for her from the bundles and leave them for her to pick up, and don't rebuke her." From Boaz's words and actions, we learn that he was a kind, caring, and generous man. We also learn more about Ruth's character in how she responded to Boaz's generosity and concern. She bowed down with her face to the ground. She asked him, "Why have I found such favor in your eyes that you notice me, a foreigner?" Boaz replied, "I've been told all about what you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband, how you left your father and mother and your homeland and came to live with a people you did not know before. May the Lord repay you for what you have done. May you be richly rewarded by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge." "May I continue to find favor in your eyes, my lord," she said. "You have put me at ease by speaking kindly to your servant, though I do not have the standing of one of your servants." 2 times Ruth referenced that she was an outsider. She acknowledged that she was a foreigner, and that she was also among the least of these when compared with Boaz's servants. But Boaz saw something else. Boaz was impressed by Ruth's loyalty to Naomi and how she had left her own family back in Moab to live among a people not her own. Boaz prayed for the Lord God, Yahweh, to bless Ruth richly. Ruth gleaned in Boaz's field until evening. She then threshed the barley, separating the barley seed from the chaff, and took home a half a bushel basket full of barley, enough grain to make about 20 loaves of bread. Ruth would continue to glean in Boaz's fields both during the barley and wheat harvests. When Naomi learned that Ruth had gleaned in Boaz's field, she was thrilled. "The Lord bless him," Naomi said to her daughter-in-law. "He has not stopped showing his kindness to the living and the dead." She added, "That man is our close relative. He is one of our guardian redeemers." So what exactly is a guardian redeemer, also known as a kinsman redeemer? The Hebrew word translated as guardian redeemer is goel, which has a variety of meanings depending on the context. It can mean redeemer, rescuer, avenger, or defender. All of these meanings point to the Old Testament obligations and privileges that one blood relative had for another blood relative. For example, God's Old Testament covenant given at Mount Sinai required that in the case of a murder, the murder was to be avenged by the goel, the next of kin. Or another example, if a family member was facing a serious financial situation or was forced into slavery, the goel was to come to that family member's assistance. Another feature of the goel was to protect the property of a family. That's what Naomi had in mind when she mentioned to Ruth that Boaz was their guardian redeemer. In the Old Testament covenant, the Lord God established a process by which a family, in most cases, could retain its property even though the father had died. The property rights of a family resided in the patriarch, the oldest male family member. The property rights would only be passed on to sons after the patriarch died. But let's say one of the patriarch's married sons died before he and his wife had a male child. God's law required that the deceased man's brother take his widowed wife as his own wife in order to produce an heir who would be considered the deceased man's son. In that way, the property rights would stay with the deceased man's family. This obligation to marry a dead brother's widow is also known as the levirate marriage. The term levirate is from a Latin word lever, which means brother-in-law. Now, if a widow didn't have an heir at the death of her father-in-law, the patriarch, she would return to her parental home. Now, in the case of Elimelech and Naomi, Elimelech's property rights passed on to Mahlon and Chilion when Elimelech died. But when Mahlon and Chilion also died, the levirate law didn't apply because there were no other brothers to fulfill the obligations of the goel. In addition, Ruth was a Moabite, not an Israelite. Did the levirate law even apply in this situation? That's why Naomi encouraged Orpah and Ruth to return to the home of their parents. But there was still an unresolved issue with Elimelech's property. Naomi needed a goel to assist her. Well, Naomi came up with a plan, and she said to Ruth, "My daughter, should I not seek rest for you that it may go well with you? Is not Boaz our relative with whose young women you were? See, he is winnowing barley tonight at the threshing floor. Wash therefore and anoint yourself, and put on your cloak and go down to the threshing floor. But do not make yourself known to the man until he has finished eating and drinking. But when he lies down, observe the place where he lies. Then go and uncover his feet and lie down, and he will tell you what to do." And she replied, "All that you say, I will do." The phrase, "should I not seek rest for you," means seeking a resting place, and by inference, should I not seek a home for you? Ruth trusted Naomi and carried out the plan. After Boaz fell asleep at the threshing floor by a mound of barley, Ruth came to him, uncovered his feet, and laid down at his feet. At midnight, the man was startled and turned over, and behold, a woman lay at his feet. He said, "Who are you?" And she answered, "I am Ruth, your servant. Spread your wings over your servant, for you are a redeemer." The phrase "spread your wings" can also be translated as "spread the corners of your garment." The Hebrew word that Ruth used implied marriage. What Ruth said was bold and forward. Ruth asked Boaz to be her and Naomi's redeemer, which in essence meant, "Boaz, would you take me as your wife?" Asking such a question was not without its risks. Would Boaz rebuff Ruth as a loose gold-digging woman? Would he quietly send her away? Would he take advantage of her there on the threshing floor? No. Boaz was a man of integrity and knew Ruth as a woman of noble character. Boaz actually responded in giving Ruth high praise. "May you be blessed by the Lord, my daughter. You have made this last kindness greater than the first, in that you have not gone after young men, whether rich or poor. And now, my daughter, do not fear. I will do for you all that you ask. For all my fellow townsmen know that you are a worthy woman. And now it is true that I am a redeemer. Yes, there is a redeemer nearer than I. Remain tonight, and in the morning, if he will redeem you, good. Let him do it. But if he is not willing to redeem you, then as the Lord lives, I will redeem you. Lie down until morning. Boaz was willing to be Ruth and Naomi's redeemer, but there was another potential redeemer who was a closer relative. Long story short, Boaz informed the closer relative about Ruth. The relative ended up declining the opportunity because he indicated that redeeming the property would have a negative impact on his own estate. Boaz then declared before the town leaders, "Today you are witnesses that I have bought from Naomi all the property of Elimelech, Kilion, and Mahlon. I have also acquired Ruth the Moabite, Mahlon's widow, as my wife, in order to maintain the name of the dead with this property, so that his name will not disappear from among his family or from his hometown. Today you are witnesses." Boaz married Ruth, and the Lord God enabled Ruth to conceive and give birth to a son, and he was named Obed. Obed would be the future father of Jesse, who would be the future father of David. Generations later, a descendant of David would be born to Mary and Joseph in the little town of Bethlehem, named Jesus. What ties the story of Ruth together with the story of Jesus is the concept of a redeemer. Boaz redeemed Naomi and Ruth. He bought back the property of Elimelech so that Naomi and Ruth would live as a family and to preserve the property of that family. Jesus redeemed the world. Through his life, death, and resurrection, he bought us back from our lost condition so that we could once again be eternal members of God's family. We are so blessed to have been redeemed. The least of these, Ruth. In our next episode, we will explore the life of a young Israelite girl who had been taken captive by a neighboring enemy. Her humble testimony brought about the eventual healing of a mighty military man. If you have any questions or comments regarding this episode or this series, I'd love to hear from you. Just email me at bruce@timeofgrace.org. Thanks for listening, and God bless.